Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Our second reading is from the 11th chapter of Isaiah and the first 10 verses. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash round his waist. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious.
Good morning. It is great to see you here. Now, Christmas involves a lot of waiting, doesn't it? For children, as we've already mentioned, it's the Advent calendar, isn't it? The 24 days that you're counting down to Christmas, opening up and getting your chocolate. And every chocolate that's removed is one day closer to Christmas, one day of greater anticipation and excitement. And in the waiting, we need to get ready, don't we? We need to buy our gifts, which is one of the main things we need to do in order to get ready. Now, for some of us, we may be buying our gifts this afternoon. Is anyone still on the dash to get some gifts? No, well done. You're all very well organized. That's very good. But some people, they take advantage of the Boxing Day sales and are already ready for Christmas in terms of gift buying by the end of January. I wonder if we've got any of those people in the room. You don't have to admit to it. Don't worry. We know you're here. We respect you. We're just very different from you. Now, the birth of Jesus into this world, that involved some sort of countdown as well. He didn't just come out of the blue. It didn't just happen. So there was some sort of countdown that was happening, and there was a lot of waiting and anticipating that needed to happen before the birth of Jesus into this world. Now, all of this actually took thousands of years of history. That's how long the countdown was. Not 24 days, not even the 9 months that Mary was pregnant, but it involved thousands of years of history. And over those thousands of years, God was working things. He was orchestrating the historical events like a conductor over history. He was using these promises and explanations through his messengers that were the prophets, so that everything could be ready for the time when Jesus would be born, the time when the waiting was over. One of those messengers who helped create this body of information about what Jesus would be like was the chap called Isaiah, who we've read part of his book. He lived around 700 years before Jesus was born. 700 years before, and he was talking about what Jesus would be like, which in itself is incredible. So what Isaiah said, what he proclaimed to the people, that was recorded, written down, and compiled into this book that we have in our Bibles, the book of Isaiah. And at various points, it tells us what this promised person would be like. That's what a Messiah is. It's one who is promised of God. So 700 years after Isaiah said all of this promised person turned up. This promised person, this Messiah, who is Jesus. So this morning, I want to just explore what Isaiah is saying about what this promised Messiah would be like. And for us to see how that is Jesus, how he is the one that was promised. Now, Isaiah provides us more information than we could pack into one morning. So I've taken someone else's structure, a bloke called Alec Mattia, and used that to help break things down for us a little bit this morning. So the first section of Isaiah, and the first aspect of his promise, is that the Messiah is a king. Tying in nicely with what Hannah said, the Messiah as king. And this is in the first section of Isaiah, chapters 1 to 39. Do you remember in the Christmas narrative how the wise men, first of all, in order to try and visit Jesus, they went to the wrong place. They went to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was the capital city. It was the place where the king lived in his palace. And so because these wise men, journeying from afar, were coming to see a newborn king, they came to the wrong place. So they were looking for a king. They knew that they were looking for the king, which led them to the wrong place. But that's what the promises indicated, that there would be this newborn king. You may have heard of a chap in the Bible called Moses. He led God's people through the Red Sea, and he gave people God's laws as well. And as part of those laws, he explained that at some point, when they get into their land, they're going to want a king to rule over them. But Moses said, using God's words, speaking to the people, he said that the king that is appointed must be the king that God chooses. It must be a king who follows God's ways. It must be a king who doesn't think too highly of himself, because otherwise he will neglect the people. And eventually that time came when they were to appoint a king. And the king that they appointed eventually was David. Again, you may have heard of David. He's well known for beating Goliath, the very tall guy in the Bible. And he eventually became king over Israel. God established him as king. And as that happened, God also made some promises. And these promises are important for us. God promised David that there would always be a king in his line on the throne in Jerusalem. Now, this is what Isaiah is saying 300 years after David, 700 years before Jesus, roughly. So up on the screen, this is what Isaiah says. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. Now, Jesse there, that is David's father. So that is the connection that we see there. So it's talking about from David's line. From David's father, there will be a line of kings. So it's depicting the family tree. Now, perhaps you did that in history. Perhaps you went through the kings and queens of Great Britain in your history lessons. Perhaps you know some of the family trees. Well, all royal families have to have family trees, don't they? And Jesse had David as king, and David's line had a family tree. But what do you notice about this family tree? It's described as a stump. This tree, this royal family tree, God is going to cut down. So the kings of Israel, David was a good king, but many of the kings that followed him were bad kings. They didn't love God and his ways, and they thought too much of themselves to the neglect of the people that they were ruling over. And since they were so often bad, God said he was going to be a lumberjack and cut the tree down. It happened a short time after Isaiah delivered these messages. The kings were cut off as the land was invaded. But nevertheless, God is saying here through Isaiah that although the kings are cut off, there's going to be some growth. That's what happens with trees sometimes. If you cut them down, they grow back again. The really good trees anyway. And so God is saying that though this tree will be cut down, a branch will grow again, and there will be another king in David's line. Now it's interesting that in Matthew's account of Christmas, he starts with a family tree. And in Luke's account of Christmas, he ends with a family tree. And both family trees show how Jesus comes in the line of David, in the line of kings. So Jesus is going to be a promised king in the line of David. It's important within this that Jesus is born through Mary, but also born through Mary as Mary is a virgin. It shows his human nature and his divine nature as this human and divine king who would rule over us. And we see this in Isaiah as well. You may have heard these words from Isaiah. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel. So the short of all this is that there's a promised one who would come who would be a king who would love God's ways and love God's people, born from David's line, from a virgin, and he would be God living amongst humanity. And this is who Jesus is as a king. This is who we celebrate at Christmas time. The second aspect of the Messiah in Isaiah is the Messiah as servant in chapters 40 to 55. Now, can you imagine on Christmas Day, you go into your kitchen and you think you've got to start getting Christmas dinner ready, and there's King Charles. And he's peeling all your vegetables, and then the trash gets, the rubbish gets a bit full, the bin's a bit full. So he takes out your rubbish for you, and after the kids have opened the presents, he's gathering up all the wrapping paper. Can you imagine that? Of course not. King Charles wouldn't do that for you, would he? I'm sure he's a great bloke, but he's not going to be doing that for you on Christmas morning. You see, it doesn't seem compatible, the idea of a king being a servant. Kings have servants, don't they? And servants are never kings, because if you're a king, you have your servants to do your servanting, and servants never get to the point of being kings. But that's not how the kings of Israel were supposed to be. The kings of Israel were supposed to be servants. They were supposed to see the needs of the people and address the needs of the people. So this theme of this promised one being a servant is particularly picked up in the middle section of Isaiah. And here's how that section begins. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit in him. You may have noticed that the Spirit needed to be on this promised one to be the king, but he also needs the Spirit of God to empower him to be a servant as well. So if we're going to have this king who is also a servant who serves us at our point of need, we've got to ask, what are our needs as human beings? In fact, we can ask the question, what is our greatest need? And as this section develops, it explains something significant to us. Later on in Isaiah 53, also here up on the screen, it says, "We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him, on this servant, the iniquity of us all." You see, our greatest need as human beings is that we've gone astray. We've created this disconnect between ourselves and God because we've chosen our own way of thinking, our own idea of what is right and wrong. Rather than recognizing God as the one who gives us our identity and purpose as human beings, we've decided we can come up with that for ourselves. That's our greatest need. And if that's our great problem of the fact that we've gone away from God, we need for someone to take that away from us. We call the rebellion of our hearts our sin, and so we need for someone to take our sin off us and carry it away. And that's what this chapter in Isaiah, chapter 53, is talking about. That the one who was promised would be a servant even to the point of dying and taking our sin upon themselves so that we don't have to bear it for ourselves. This one who would pay for our sin, they needed to be human in order to pay for human sin. That's why Jesus needed to be human. But they also needed to be a perfect human being. Because if they were a flawed human being themselves, they would first have to pay for their own sin, which they couldn't do. So Jesus needed to be both human in order to pay for human sin, but also divine, God, in order to be perfect so that he could then carry our sin because he had no sin of his own. Again, that's why the virgin birth is essential in all of this, preserving both his human nature in Mary, but his divine nature in the Spirit. So when the time came, Jesus was born into this world as our servant, to meet us in our greatest point of need, the need for our sins forgiven, the need to be made right with God. He needed to die in our place for our sin for that to happen. Well, the final section, Messiah as judge, in chapters 56 to 66 of Isaiah. Now, this time of year, there's usually some sort of talent show going on, isn't there? Some sort of talent show on the TV where they're trying to find the winner. Now, last week, I believe it was the Strictly Come Dancing final. Is that right? You sound really convinced there. Now, please don't tell me who won because I haven't watched it and I really don't care. So please don't tell me. But the role of the judges on these talent shows, they are there to decide who gets through either to the next round or to win the whole thing, don't they? They get the decision. The power is in their hands. And the way that they decide who goes through or who wins is who's good enough. Who's good enough to be through or to win? Now, God's plans for this universe, they involve a remake of this world. We know that this world is flawed. We know that there are things that go wrong in this world. I don't have to tell you about that. But in this remake that will happen, there will be no more sadness, no more pain, no more war, no more death, no more disappointment and frustration, and all of those bad things that are a part of our life, they will be taken away. Sounds great, doesn't it? That's what God's plans are for this universe, for this world. But in order for that world to exist in the future, it needs to exist with nothing bad in it. Everything that is wrong needs to have been taken away. Everything that is wrong in us needs to have been taken away. Nothing imperfect can enter that new future. Which means we need a judge. We need someone who is going to decide what goes into this new creation, this new world, and what stays out of this new world. Who goes into this new creation? Who stays out? But unlike the TV talent show judges, it is not based on who's good enough. If it were based on who's good enough, none of us would be good enough. None of us would reach the standard that is required to be part of this new world. Because we've all got the capacity for doing things that are wrong. As much as we've got great capacity for doing good, we also have capacity for doing wrong. And even if we're the best that we can possibly be, we still have that capacity for doing what is wrong. So to enter into this new creation, this new world that Isaiah talks about, it is not based on whether you are good enough, because otherwise there will be no humans able to be there except Jesus himself. But instead it's based on a gift of forgiveness in Jesus, a gift of forgiveness that transforms us and changes us, a gift that we call grace, because grace is that which we don't deserve, that is given freely to us by God. Now, when Jesus started his public ministry, he read these words in Isaiah. They're on the screen now. "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. He has sent me to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance for our God." Notice one is long, one is short. That's important. That's worth dwelling on. But the time of the Lord's favor is now. God has given us a chance to respond to his gift of grace in Jesus. A chance to be forgiven and to recognize that our sin has been laid on Jesus so that we could be made right with God. A chance to receive this transformation that begins in our hearts. Now is the year of the Lord's favor. But there is also a day to come. A day of God giving us what we actually do deserve. So for those who have not met the Lord in his favor, there is... Sorry about that. We use this microphone. For those who don't meet the Lord in his favor in this time, in this year of favor, there is a day of vengeance, a day of God giving us what we deserve for our wrongdoing. But the offer made in Jesus through his birth, his life, his death, is that we can be forgiven of our sins. We can be made right with God. We can eventually enjoy this new world, not because we were good enough, but because we've received the gift of grace in Jesus. Now, we began by thinking about waiting, didn't we? The calendars, the preparations that need to be done. The world waited in a long time for Jesus to be born. But when he was born, the time was right. The promises had been made. History was ready for him. And he came as a king. He came as a servant to give his life. He came to announce that there will one day be a time when he will return as judge. And if each one of us will accept Jesus as our King and bow to him, if we will recognize that as a servant he gave his life on my behalf so that I could be forgiven, and if we recognize that he is the right one to determine our entry into the new creation, then at that point he will welcome us in. He will welcome us into that new world rather than executing his judgment upon us. But the question each one of us has got to ask is, what are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? There is no time limit that you have to wait for in order to become a Christian. It's not that you have to be good enough, because none of us are. It's not that you have to have come to church enough times or have said enough prayers or tried your hardest for a while. That's not what it involves. There is no countdown to becoming a Christian. Become a believer in Jesus now. Put your trust in him now. Do it today. Turn to him. Receive his forgiveness. Accept him as King and Lord.